Welcome back to the program. Joining me live in the studio is the Shadow Assistant Minister for Home Ownership, Andrew Bragg. Thanks for your time. I want to get your thoughts on what Jim Chalmers has announced today. He's reached out to the regulators, wanting to make it easier for first home buyers, those with higher education debts. Do you welcome this?
Well, I think firstly, it's very important that we recognise the role of lending and banking policy in actually getting people into houses. But this is a very small change that may allow some people to borrow a little bit more, but it's a very niche change overall.
Well, when you say niche, it'll be pretty crucial to this cohort though, won't it? It will enable people to get finance. You can't get a house if you can't get finance unless you have mum and dad supporting.
Correct, but it's not a structural change. It's not looking at the way that APRA, the regulator, actually makes its laws and its rules around mortgages. So it doesn't look at lenders' mortgage insurance, it doesn't look at the capital risk weights, doesn't look at the buffer.
So that would be across the board what you're talking about?
Well, I think there's a strong case for a more structural change here. This is a small change. Some people may be able to borrow a bit more, and that's good.
And you welcome it?
Yeah.
So you welcome the change as a step?
Yes, it will be a small change. I don't think it's going to transform the universe, but it is a sensible idea. But, of course, the bigger issue is how APRA makes its rules for mortgages, and that really goes to the serviceability buffer and then the way that those mortgages are treated for capital purposes.
Is this still a legacy in your view of the global financial crisis? Is that what where we got the tougher rules put in place and they've just remained? Is that right?
Look, I think the fact is that APRA is a regulator that most politicians don't want to talk about much because it's very complex, and so they operate in their own little world. The Treasurer's written them a letter. I'm sure that they will now talk to the banks and see what can be done. But I don't think it's going to be massively material for most people. And I think if it had been, then I think the government would have done some work and some numbers on saying how many people it might help and how much money they might be able to borrow.
On a different issue, the rates likely to be cut next week. If they are cut, do you think the big banks will pass them through?
Oh, I'm sure that they will.
It'd be a bit rich if they didn't, wouldn't it?
I'm sure that they will. I'm sure that they will sniff the breeze. And given that they are making significant profits, I'm sure that they will be very careful of any public perception.
Well, we saw, exactly. We saw the Commonwealth Bank today that CBA writes a quarter of all mortgages. So you would imagine, given this massive profit announced today, rates to be cut likely next week, there won't be a controversy off the back of that, surely.
Well, let's see. I mean, there have been 12 interest rate rises under this government, and when those occurred, the banks increased the cost of their mortgages accordingly.
I imagine
they'll get the downward benefit to consumers.
Andrew Bragg, great to see you as always. Thanks. There are calls for the